I said goodbye to my dying wife and walked out of the hospital. Then I heard the nurses talking. It was the hardest moment of my life, watching my wife, Anna, lying there, pale and fragile. Machines doing what her body could no longer manage. The cancer had spread faster than any of us anticipated. After months of fighting, the doctors told us this was the end. No more treatment, just waiting. I held her hand one last time, whispered, "I love you," and kissed her forehead. She didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. I had already mourned her 100 times in my heart, but walking out of that hospital room felt like the final tear in my soul. I made it halfway down the hallway, fighting to stay composed. When I slowed near the nurse's station, that's when I heard it. Her vitals are climbing, heart rate just spiked. One nurse whispered urgently. Could it be a response? She squeezed his hand before he left. Did you see that? My heart stopped. I turned around, barely processing their words. The nurse caught my eye. Sir, wait, she might not be gone yet. I ran back. Machines beeped louder. Anna's eyelids fluttered. A faint tear rolled down her cheek. Anna, I whispered. She turned her head slightly and mouthed, "Don't go." After saying goodbye to someone you've shared your life with is a kind of death in itself. It's not just the parting of two people. It's the unraveling of years stitched together in laughter, in sorrow, in shared morning coffees and quiet midnight tears. As I stood beside Anna's hospital bed, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, watching the very ground of my life crumble beneath me. The woman I loved, still love, was barely recognizable from the vibrant soul she once was. Tubes ran from her arms, her chest rose and fell, but each breath sounded like a fading whisper. Her skin was translucent under the hospital's sterile light. I had prepared myself a dozen times to say goodbye, rehearsed it in my mind like a monologue, yet nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. My voice trembled as I leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead and whispering, "I love you. You can rest now." I wanted her to know she could let go if that's what she needed. I wanted to be selfless, to be the kind of man who could carry her pain so she wouldn't have to. But the truth is, I was breaking. Every fiber of my being screamed at me not to leave, not to say those words, not to accept that this was the end. Our love had survived storms, miscarriages, fights, and financial ruin. We had clung to each other when the world was merciless. And now, in this quiet, sterile room filled with the beeping of machines and the scent of antiseptic, I was being asked to unclasp my grip. It felt cruel. It felt impossible. My fingers held hers gently, trying to memorize the feel of her hand. Before it was gone, her wedding ring was loose now, her fingers thin from the months of weight loss. I remember the day I slipped that ring on her finger, how her hand shook not from illness, but joy. Now, I was the one shaking. I bent down and kissed her forehead. It was cold to cold and still. She didn't move. Her eyes had remained closed for days. The doctor said it could be hours, maybe minutes. The final countdown wasn't exacted. Never is. But they were certain it had begun. There were no more treatments, no more miracles to chase. All we had left was time, and it was slipping through the cracks. I whispered stories into her ear, stories of our first date, of our daughter's birth, of the way she used to dance barefoot in the kitchen to old Beatles records. I hoped my voice could reach her somewhere deep in the fog. I wanted my words to be the last thing she heard, not the hollow hum of hospital equipment. And when I had said everything I thought mattered, I stood. My knees barely held me. My chest felt crushed beneath an invisible weight. Still, I had to go. That's what the doctors told me. Give her space. Let her go in peace. But peace is a luxury for the living, for the dying. And for those who love them, there is only waiting and aching silence. As I turned to leave the room, I looked back one last time. She lay there still, peaceful, in her way, as if already halfway to wherever souls go when they leave this world. That final glance is seared into my memory. It was a portrait of beauty and tragedy, the woman I loved surrounded by the machinery of death, but still mine in every way that mattered. I held the doorframe for a second, unsure if my legs could carry me. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized I was walking away from half of myself. I didn't cry immediately. The tears came later, like a delayed storm. But in that moment, the numbness was worse than any weeping. I felt hollow, carved out. My goodbye had taken everything I had left to give. Love is not only about presence. Sometimes it's about release. And releasing Anna choosing to walk away from her hospital bed, knowing I might never see her alive again, was the most painful act of love I have ever committed. It was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it was final, or so I thought. What I didn't know then was that life has its own strange rhythms, that some goodbyes are not permanent, that sometimes the heart fights back and the soul clings harder than anyone expects. But in that instant, I believed it was the end. The goodbye was real to me, and it broke me in a quiet, irreversible way. I walked down the corridor not as a man going home, but as a man leaving behind everything he ever truly loved. Each step felt like betrayal, and yet I kept walking because that's what you do when there's nothing else left. Hope is a strange thing. In the beginning, it burns like a bonfire. You cling to it. Feed it with every good thought, every whispered prayer, every promising test result. But when hope begins to die, it doesn't go out in one swift motion. It flickers, it dims. It stutters like a candle caught in the wind, refusing to give up even as the darkness gathers. That was what our journey had become, a slow, excruciating erosion of light. When Anna was first diagnosed, the doctors spoke in measured tones, their words soaked in cautious optimism. We caught it early. She's young. There's a strong chance of remission. We took those words and wrapped them around ourselves like armor. We believed them because believing was the only way we could breathe. But month after month, the scans told a different story. The treatments that were supposed to help only delayed the inevitable. Her strength began to fade, slowly at first, then rapidly, as if some unseen hand had begun pulling her away from me. I watched her suffer in ways I could never have imagined. Chemo was cruel. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her skin turned paper thin. Her eyes lost their luster. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't smile. And the worst part wasn't the physical decay, it was the look she gave me. When she thought I wasn't watching, the quiet, haunted expression that said she was trying to hold on, but she was slipping. There's a kind of helplessness that no man is prepared for, the kind that comes from watching the woman you love cry in silence, because she doesn't want to break your heart. But I knew. I always knew. And I hated that there was nothing I could do. No words, no touch, no gesture could ease her pain or slow the cancer's spread. That's what hopelessness really is, not just the absence of solutions, but the erosion of meaning, the quiet destruction of everything you believed life owed you. At some point, the doctor stopped offering suggestions. Their language changed. They no longer said next step, but keep her comfortable. They spoke in vague medical euphemisms that I began to decipher as code for death. Palliative care became our new reality. Every day turned into a battle of keeping her breathing, keeping her conscious, keeping her in this world long enough for one more conversation, one more moment of eye contact, one more whispered "I love you." But even those became rare. She began to drift, sleeping more, responding less. I sat at her bedside, holding her hand, talking to her even when I wasn't sure she could hear me. The room smelled like antiseptic and sterile linens. The walls were pale and cold, like a place designed to forget. Nurses moved quietly around us, their faces unreadable. They'd seen it all before, but for me, this wasn't just another patient. This was Anna, my everything, and I was losing her in slow motion. The worst moment came when a doctor pulled me aside. He didn't take me into an office. He didn't sit me down gently or offer tissues. He stood in the hallway with his clipboard and said the words that obliterated whatever sliver of hope I had left. "There's nothing more we can do." I remember the sound of those words more than their meaning. It felt like a bell tolling in the distance, announcing an ending I wasn't ready to accept. I nodded numbly, but inside, I was screaming. How could this be it? How could this be the end of a life so vibrant, so kind, so full of dreams. We had plans. We had anniversaries left to celebrate. We had places we wanted to visit. We were supposed to grow old together, not end in a hospital room with 4 bags and fading heart monitors. I walked back into the room with those words ringing in my ears, and I looked at Anna, and for the first time, I saw death settling into her face. It wasn't gruesome or sudden, it was gentle, almost merciful, but it was there, unmistakable. Her chest still rose and fell, but barely. Her hands were cold, her lips dry and cracked, and all I could think was, this can't be happening. This isn't how it's supposed to end. And yet, hopelessness doesn't care about how things are supposed to go. It arrives quietly, steals your voice, and sits in your chest like a stone you can't swallow. I wanted to scream, to beg, to plead with some unseen force to turn the tide, to undo the damage, but I had no energy left. I had wept until my body ached, prayed until my knees were bruised, and still, she slipped further away. I hope, when it's alive, gives you the strength to fight. But when it's gone, you become a shell. That's what I had become, a man reduced to routine. Hold her hand, kiss her forehead, whisper sweet nothings to a woman who was barely there. I hated myself for beginning to grieve before she was gone. But how could I not? Her soul was already drifting. I could feel it. And in that vacuum of despair, everything felt meaningless. The world outside the hospital kept spinning. People kept living their lives, but mine had stopped. The lights were on. The machines were humming. But inside me, there was silence. Utter silence. Hopelessness is not a dramatic collapse. It's not loud or cinematic. It's slow. It's the moment you stop checking your phone for miracle messages. It's when you stop asking the doctors for updates. It's when you look at her and realize you're no longer hoping for recovery, you're just hoping for a peaceful end. And that shift, when hope turns into resignation, is one of the most soul-crushing transformations a person can go through. I never thought I'd reach that point, but I did. And when I said goodbye to her later that day, I wasn't saying it in anger or denial. I was saying it because I had finally accepted what I had once refused to believe, that the woman I loved was slipping beyond my reach, and there was nothing in this world I could do to bring her back. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed or timed or spoken of. It simply happened, spontaneous, instinctive, born out of a love that had nowhere else to go, and yet it held the weight of everything. The final kiss is not just a kiss. It's a ritual, a farewell, a whisper of everything that cannot be said in words. When I leaned down to press my lips to Anna's forehead, I didn't expect anything to happen. I didn't expect a miracle. I didn't expect her to stir or smile or whisper back. I kissed her because it was the only thing I had left to offer. I had said the words, "I love you. It's okay to go. You don't have to fight anymore." But words, no matter how gentle or sincere, felt small in that moment. Touch, I realized, was the last sacred language we had left, and so I bent down, my heart shattering in my chest, and kissed her as tenderly as I could, knowing it would likely be the last time. My lips touched her warm skin. There was something haunting about how still she was. For months, I had watched her body betray her, little by little, her hands twitching involuntarily, her mouth struggling to form words, her eyes fluttering like she was stuck between two realities. But now, she was completely still, no flinching, no tension, just silence, as if she had already moved beyond the pain and was waiting, suspended in some liminal space between this life and whatever comes after. That kiss, it felt like I was sealing a chapter of my life, a life that had begun the day we met, blossomed when we married, and deepened with every memory we made together. And now, with the gentle press of my lips against her skin, the life was closing. Quietly, reverently, I lingered, not wanting to let go. My forehead rested against hers, my hand still cradling her cheek. I inhaled slowly, trying to memorize her scent, though the smell of antiseptic and plastic tubing tried its best to mask it. But beneath it all, there was still a trace of her lavender, lotion, soft skin, that warmth that only she had. I whispered again, not expecting an answer, just needing to say it. I love you. I will always love you. And as I pulled back, I looked at her face not with the hope of seeing her eyes open, but with the need to remember. I took in every line, every curve, the way her lips parted ever so slightly when she breathed. I wanted to carry that image with me for the rest of my life. That kiss held years in it, decades, even. It held the first time we kissed, awkward and sweet. When we were just young and stupid and full of dreams, it held our wedding day kiss. When we stood in front of our families and promised forever, it held the exhausted kisses we shared after putting our daughter to sleep, the kisses we gave each other before rushing out the door to work, the ones we exchanged in the kitchen while making breakfast, while brushing past each other in the hallway, while doing absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. That kiss, the last one, was all of those kisses at once, a memory of love made flesh. I think I cried then, but it wasn't the kind of crying people notice. There was no sobbing, no gasping for breath, just tears slipping down my cheeks, silent and heavy. I didn't wipe them away. I didn't care. What is dignity in the face of such loss? All I could do was stand there, hand on hers, the memory of the kiss still fresh on my lips, and try to find the strength to walk away. That was the unbearable part. Not the kiss itself, but what came after. The leaving, the turning of the back, the opening of the door to a world without her in it. Kissing her felt like permission and betrayal at the same time, like I was giving her the okay to go, but also silently begging her to stay. It's a paradox that only the grieving truly understand. You want them free of pain, but not gone. You want them to be at peace, but not without you. That kiss was me trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. And the most devastating thing was knowing she couldn't kiss me back. That reflex was gone. That part of her was already unreachable. But I kissed her anyway, because love doesn't stop just because it's no longer returned. That's the truth of real love. It endures, even when it's one-sided. Even when the person you love is slipping away. As I straightened and took one last look at her, I felt something rise in my chest. Grief, certainly, but also reverence. There was a kind of sacredness in that moment. The quiet of the room, the rhythm of her shallow breaths, the memory of the kiss hanging in the air like incense in a chapel. I was a man saying goodbye to his wife, yes, but I was also a man witnessing the sacred passage of a soul. That kiss marked the threshold. It was the border between what was and what would never be again. It was goodbye, and it was thank you. It was I love you, and I'll never stop. And then, slowly, I let go of her hand. My fingers lingered on her wrist, feeling for a pulse I already knew was weak. The nurse in the corner gave me a soft, respectful nod, as if she understood what I had just done. She had seen it before, but for me, it was new. It was devastating. It was sacred. I walked toward the door, every step an act of will, and behind me, lying peacefully, was the woman who had made my life beautiful, the woman who had given me reason to believe in love, the woman I had just kissed goodbye for the last time. I had already made peace, at least the kind of peace one forces themselves to make when there's no choice left. As I walked slowly down the stark, lifeless corridor of the hospital, each step felt heavier than the last. The silence, the sterile air, the cold artificial lights, all of it conspired to make the moment feel final. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with the body and everything to do with what it means to leave someone behind. It was done. I had said goodbye. I had kissed her for the last time. I had touched her skin knowing it might never be warm again. That should have been the end of it. But grief has a strange sense of timing. It lingers like fog, and just when you think you're sinking into the final quiet, something pulls you back, something unexpected. I was almost at the elevator when I heard them, the nurses. I wasn't listening at first. I was lost in my own haze of sorrow, barely aware of anything around me. But then their voices pierced through the static in my mind. Her vitals are climbing, one of them said, not loudly, but with a kind of urgency that made my body freeze mid-step. I didn't even fully understand what I was hearing. The words came through like an echo, climbing. That couldn't be, right? Vitals don't climb when someone is dying, not when the doctor has already said. It's only a matter of hours. I turned instinctively, like a reflex. Maybe I misheard. Maybe it wasn't Anna they were talking about. But then I heard the second nurse. She squeezed his hand before he left. Did you see that? And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. Something ancient and primal surged through me: hope, confusion, fear, all tangled together in a frantic heartbeat. My feet carried me before I even realized I had moved. I turned around, retracing my steps, pushing past the silence that had just swallowed me moments before. The nurses noticed. One of them looked startled, almost unsure whether to say something. "Sir," she said, "you might want to come back. Something's happening." And in that instant, the world flipped. I walked, then ran, back down the corridor, back to her room. My body moved like it was possessed, driven by something bigger than understanding. I burst through the door, expecting what? A miracle? A resurrection? No, just something, anything. And there she was, still lying, in the bed, still fragile, pale, surrounded by wires and machines. But something had changed. The machines, those cruel indicators of life's presence or absence, had come back to life. They beeped faster, louder. Her heart rate had jumped slightly, but noticeably. Her breathing had shifted, still shallow, but stronger. The nurse beside her was checking her pulse. And then came the moment I will never forget. Her eyelids flickered. I didn't speak at first. I was too stunned. But then, in a trembling whisper that cracked with disbelief, I said her name, Anna. Her face didn't move. Her lips didn't part. But her eyes fluttered again this time, longer. And then, a tear, just one, sliding down the side of her face. And it felt like the universe stopped spinning. That tear was more than water and salt. It was a scream in silence, a signal from a distant place. It was her telling me that she was still here, that goodbye wasn't the end, that something inside her had heard me, that the kiss, the touch, the words "I love you, I'll never let you go" had meant something, reached her, touched the soul that doctors had already pronounced slipping away. I rushed to her side, fell to my knees beside the bed, took her hand again. "Anna," I whispered, this time barely able to hold back my own tears. "I'm here. I never left." Her lips didn't move, but her fingers did. Just a twitch, just enough to know it wasn't random. And then, like a miracle straining through the weight of death itself, her head turned ever so slightly toward the sound of my voice. What do you do in a moment like that? You cry, you hope, you pray harder than you ever have. You forget every medical prediction, every statistic, every bleak word the doctors have given you. Because in that one flicker, in that single moment of life pushing back against the darkness, everything changes. I didn't need her to sit up. I didn't need her to speak. Just knowing she was still with me, still fighting, still listening, was enough to collapse everything I thought I knew about the end. The line between life and death is thinner than we think, more fragile than we want to believe. And somehow, she had lingered on the edge and heard me, felt me. The nurses moved quickly now, checking her monitors, calling the attending physician. But I stayed still, locked in that moment with her. All I could do was whisper her name over and over again, stroke her hair, press her hand to my cheek. "Anna, you're okay," I said, even though I didn't know if that was true. "You're safe. I'm right here." I had walked out of that room seconds earlier, prepared to lose everything. And now she was calling me back, not with words, not with strength, but with the quiet, undeniable persistence of love refusing to die. This wasn't a recovery. This wasn't the end of her illness. It was still too early to know what this meant. But I knew it meant something, and in the world of grief, that something can be everything. The unexpected twist wasn't that she was healed, it was that she had not yet left, that there was still a connection, still a thread binding us together across the dark. And I will never forget that feeling, the jolt of being pulled back from despair, the astonishment of realizing that maybe, just maybe, love could hold someone in place even when the body was failing. That hope, though buried and bloodied, could still breathe. There are moments in life when everything slows down, not because the world around you has changed, but because something within you has. As I stood beside Anna's bed, reeling from what I had just seen, her eyelids fluttering, the soft movement of her fingers, I found myself frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. Then came the sound that would change everything. The machines, previously so quiet, began to chirp and beep again, not in their dull, metronomic rhythm of impending death, but in a new tone, a quicker one, a livelier one. The heart monitor, once crawling near stillness, now showed a spike, a jump, a fight. Her heart rate was rising. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was a malfunction, a fluke. Maybe the equipment was being reset. Maybe someone had adjusted something. I leaned in closer, watching the digital numbers climb slowly but steadily. 42, 51, 58, 62. It wasn't racing, no, but it was moving up, not down. I heard the nurse beside me draw in a short breath. She didn't speak right away, but her eyes widened. She stepped forward, adjusting the oxygen cannula beneath Anna's nose. Then she checked the blood pressure monitor. Her voice, now laced with a cautious kind of urgency, said, "Her vitals are improving," and those words, simple, clinical, even understated, hit me harder than anything I'd ever heard in my life. Improving, a word I hadn't dared hope for in weeks. For so long, the vocabulary of Anna's illness had been brutal, terminal, palliative, non-responsive, declining. Each word, a dagger, each update, a death sentence in slow motion. But now there was movement in the other direction as the numbers ticked upward. Something inside me cracked open, not the old reckless hope I'd once had, but something quieter, more sacred, the hope that returns only when all else has been stripped away and there is nothing left but raw faith. I looked at Anna again, this time not as a dying woman, but as someone who might still be trying to live. Her lips trembled, almost imperceptibly. Her neck muscles twitched. Her breathing had changed to still shallow, still soft, but no longer laborious. It was smoother, more rhythmic, like something within her had remembered how to keep going, like her body had received the message that I hadn't really left, that I had returned, that I was still here. I remembered every beep, every graph, every blinking light from the past few months. In hospitals, we learn to fear the machines because we associate their silence with death. And for days, those machines had been flatlining, slowing, decaying just as she had. But now, they were singing a different song, and it was beautiful. There was no dramatic alarm, no sudden awakening, just the steady, persistent sound of numbers rising, signals returning, like a voice in the dark whispering, "Not yet, not yet." I turned to the nurse again. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely more than a breath. She hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because she didn't want to give false hope. That's what nurses do. They live in the space between compassion and caution. "It means her body is responding to something," she said gently. "It doesn't guarantee anything, but it's not what we expected, not what we expected." That was the theme of the day, wasn't it? Nothing had gone according to any plan, certainly not the doctor's, and definitely not mine. I had walked out of that room minutes earlier thinking I had said my last goodbye. I had kissed her like it was the end. And now here I was, witnessing a faint, flickering fight for life where there should have only been silence. The human body is mysterious that way. Sometimes, science can't explain what the soul chooses to do. And maybe, just maybe, her soul had chosen to stay because she had heard my voice, felt my touch, knew I hadn't let her go. The doctor arrived quickly after being paged. He examined the monitors, listened to her heart, shined a light into her eyes. He didn't speak much, just nodded, checked her vitals again, and said, "Let's keep monitoring her closely. This is unusual." Another word that barely scratched the surface of what was happening. But I didn't care about his measured tone. I didn't care that no one was calling it a miracle yet. For me, it already was. Her heart was beating stronger. Her numbers were rising. She was still here. And I thought to myself, is it possible that she waited? That somewhere, buried beneath layers of pain and sedation and fatigue, Anna had sensed my presence, heard my goodbye, felt my kiss and responded. It wasn't just medical. It was personal. This was not about numbers on a chart. This was about a bond that defied science, about love reaching across the threshold, about a woman not yet willing to let go, and a man who had almost given up but came back. In that room, time changed. The minutes slowed. The outside world faded. There were no thoughts about phone calls or updates or logistics. Just me, her, the beeping of machines, and the slow return of something resembling hope. I pulled a chair close to her bed again, sat down, held her hand, didn't let go. I didn't want to miss a single beat literally. Every number that climbed was a lifeline. Every breath she took was a thread weaving her back into this world. And I realized then that no matter what happened next, whether this was the beginning of a miracle or simply a momentary grace, I would carry this moment with me forever. The moment her vitals spiked, the moment the story took a turn I had no longer dared to dream of. It reminded me that life is fragile, yes, but it is also fierce. That sometimes, in the depths of despair, the human spirit finds a way to rise quietly, slowly, stubbornly, one heartbeat at a time. There is no manual for how to react when life swerves from death back toward life. Emotions don't arrive in order, and they don't ask permission. They crash into you all at once: grief, hope, disbelief, fear, and you're left drowning in a tidal wave of feeling, unsure which way is up. That was exactly what happened to me as I sat there watching Anna's vitals steady and strengthen, her breath finding rhythm again, her pulse ticking upward like a clock refusing to run out. The logic-driven part of me, the part that had been numbed by days of bleak prognosis, charts, medical lingo, and quiet nods from solemn doctors, couldn't process it. But the man who loved her, the man who had kissed her forehead goodbye just moments ago, was undone. I didn't cry in a clean, graceful way. It wasn't the kind of composed emotion you see in films where a single tear rolls down a cheek like poetry. No, this was something deeper, messier. I broke. My chest heaved. My hands trembled so violently I could hardly hold hers. My head dropped against her blanket, and I sobbed not out of sorrow, but from sheer emotional overload. I had prepared myself for her death. I had felt the weight of it settle in my bones. I had said the words no one ever wants to say, thinking they would be the last. And now, without warning, life had barged back in like an uninvited guest, dragging my heart with it. It was too much, too beautiful, too painful. How do you react when the person you love, whom you'd already begun mourning, shows signs that they're not gone after all? You react with fear because you're afraid to hope again. Hope is dangerous when you've already grieved. It feels like standing on a cliff's edge, peering into the vast unknown, and daring to believe there might be a bridge somewhere beyond the fog. I was terrified of what this meant. Was it a temporary surge, a final wave of energy before the end? Or was it something more, something sacred, something no one could explain? The unknown clawed at my chest, even as joy surged in equal measure. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to collapse all at once. The nurses around me worked quietly, but with a noticeable shift in their tone. There was no longer the stillness of resignation in the room. There was movement, energy controlled, professional, but unmistakably human. One of them placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I hadn't even noticed her approach. "She's stabilizing," she whispered, her voice kind. "It's rare, but it happens. Don't let go of her now." Her words cracked something deeper in me, something buried beneath the exhaustion and despair. I reached for Anna's hand again and held it like a lifeline. And then, in the thick of all that emotion, something unexpected. I began to speak to her, not like someone saying goodbye, but like someone calling her back. "Anna, I'm here," I said, tears still streaming down my face. "Do you hear me? You're safe. You're not alone. I'm right here." My voice was raw, breaking with every syllable, but I didn't stop. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for the nurses or the machines. It was for her, for whatever part of her was listening, for the part of her that had responded to my presence even when doctors said it was impossible, for the soul that had not yet surrendered. Emotions do strange things to memory. In that moment, my entire life with her came rushing back. Our first apartment, with the leaky faucet and orange kitchen walls we always meant to paint. Our wedding day, how her hands trembled in mine when we said our vows. The night we brought our daughter home, how she cradled her like she was made of glass. The time she danced barefoot in the rain because life's too short to wait for the sun. It all came flooding in, not as nostalgia, but as a reminder, this is who she is. This is who we are. And this was not her end. But emotional reaction isn't always uplifting. It's chaotic. For every wave of hope that crashed into me, there was a counter wave of terror. What if this was just false hope? What if I opened my heart again only to lose her twice? What if this was just the final flicker before the flame? That fear was paralyzing. I felt like I was standing on a fault line, with one foot in despair and the other in possibility, and there was no steady ground. Every beep of the machine gave me both comfort and anxiety. I couldn't tell anymore what was good and what wasn't. All I knew was that she was still breathing, and that was enough to keep me from collapsing entirely. I saw movement in her fingers again, subtle but real, and the room, though full of clinical sounds, felt wholly like I was witnessing something that defied understanding. I looked at her face, still pale, still fragile, and wondered what was happening behind those closed eyes. Was she trying to come back? Was she hearing me? Clinging to the sound of my voice like a rope pulling her from the dark? I didn't know. I still don't. But my heart believed, and that belief, fragile as it was, carried me through the storm of emotion that raged inside me. Love is powerful, yes, but love during grief is a different kind of beast. It's primal, unfiltered. It tears you open and stitches you back together in the same moment. And in that room, sitting beside the woman I loved, I felt the full weight of it, the ache, the awe, the unbearable beauty of still having something when you thought you had lost everything. I whispered her name again, over and over, not because I expected a response, but because I needed her to know that I was still there, that I would never stop being there. In the end, I wasn't the same man who had walked out of that room 20 minutes earlier, broken by goodbye. I had returned not with certainty, but with presence, with emotion, with every raw nerve exposed and beating. The emotional reaction wasn't something I could explain or contain. It overwhelmed me. But in that overwhelming, I felt something else, to a flicker of grace, and that, perhaps, was the most powerful emotion of all. There are moments in life when time stops, not in the poetic sense, but quite literally. Everything in the room stills, every breath, every sound. Every ounce of attention funnels into one fragile space, one fragile body. That's what happened. When Anna moved, it wasn't dramatic. She didn't sit up gasping for air. She didn't open her eyes and speak in full sentences. No, it was smaller than that, quieter. But in its smallness, it was massive. Her eyelids fluttered, barely perceptible. Her fingers twitched first on her right hand, then her left, and for a moment, everything around me, beeping machines, hushed nurses. The echo of rubber soles on the hospital floor just fell away. All that remained was her, and the undeniable truth. She was responding. After days of silence, of immobility, of doctors gently preparing me for her final breath, that single movement shattered everything I thought I knew about letting go. There was life there, faint, distant, but real. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff and seeing a hand reach up. From the dark, I remember blinking, unsure if I had imagined it. But then it happened again. Her fingers twitched, slowly curling like a flower reacting to sunlight. And then came the moment I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Her head turned, not far, just a slight tilt toward the sound of my voice. It was the kind of movement we take for granted in daily life, but in that context, it felt holy. I froze. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I looked at the nurse standing near the monitor, and she met my gaze with wide eyes, Her lips parted in shock. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We were witnessing the kind of response that transcends medicine. This wasn't just about synapses firing or nerves reacting to stimuli. This was intentional, purposeful. Anna was trying. From wherever she was in the space between life and death, she was trying to come back, to connect, to say something without words. I knelt down beside the bed, my face inches from hers, and whispered, "Anna, I see you. I'm here. Keep going. Please, keep going." I don't know what made me say it. Maybe desperation, maybe love, maybe the raw, trembling hope that had begun to stir inside me again. Her lips moved slightly, no words, no breathy sound, just the faintest motion, like she was trying to form something. A name, a sentence, a goodbye reversed. I'll never know, but that motion undid me completely. Her body, once so limp, now gave the tiniest signs of fight. Her shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly beneath the blanket. The machines registered each small change, a rise in heart rate, a more consistent breathing pattern, stronger oxygen saturation. They were still far from normal, still fragile, but they weren't fading anymore. They were holding on, and the more she moved those subtle, slow, aching responses, the more it felt like she was anchoring herself back into this world. Like she had heard my voice when I thought I was speaking into silence, like she had felt my final kiss and decided it didn't have to be final after all. I remember touching her face gently, brushing my thumb across her cheek. Her skin, though still cool, had more color than it did an hour before. There was a pulse beneath it, not just literal, but emotional. She was not gone, and every faint motion she made confirmed it. I began to speak more, not just softly, but continuously. I told her what day it was. I reminded her where she was. I told her what the doctors had said, but that I didn't believe them anymore. That she was stronger than they knew. That if she could hear me, if she could feel me, she wasn't alone. The nurses, though clinical by necessity, were clearly affected. I could see the shift in their demeanor, the way they lingered longer than usual, the way they watched the monitors. With cautious anticipation, one of them whispered to another, "She's making a turn." And I felt a lump in my throat. A turn. That single word gave language to everything that was unfolding. We were turning, slowly, painfully, from the cold, silent corridor of death back into the possibility of life, but physical responses, even the smallest ones, are powerful not only because they defy expectation, but because they give us something to hold onto when there is nothing left. I clung to every twitch, every breath, every tiny motion like it was gold. I studied her fingers obsessively, watching for another curl, another sign of resistance. I held her hand tighter, daring her to squeeze back, and maybe I imagined it, or maybe she did, because I swear, for the briefest second, there was pressure, a squeeze not strong, not steady, but real, intentional. That was the moment I knew I could no longer accept what the doctors had said. What no one tells you about watching someone come back, if even partially, is that it wrecks you just as much as watching them slip away. The emotional toll is staggering. You go from grief to hope so quickly it leaves you breathless. And yet, you're grateful for the breathlessness. You'd rather be gasping with belief than suffocating in loss. Her physical responses weren't declarations of recovery. They weren't promises of survival. But they were proof that something within her was still reaching out, still aware, still herself. I sat with her for hours afterward, watching for more, whispering to her, holding her hand like it was the only thing keeping her tethered. Maybe it was. Maybe love really does have that kind of power. Maybe the soul listens more deeply when everything else falls quiet. Maybe that soft kiss on her forehead, that goodbye I thought would be final, had echoed louder than I ever imagined. Anna's body spoke that day not in words, not in strength, but in movement, in the language of the living. She spoke with the slight tilt of her head, the twitch of her fingers, the quiet breath that wasn't quite finished, and I listened. I heard her. I believed her, not because a monitor told me to, not because a nurse confirmed it, but because I felt her saying, in every small gesture. I'm still here. Some connections cannot be explained by science or captured by language. They go beyond the boundaries of sound, beyond even sight, dwelling in a space where soul meets soul, where love transcends the need for words. That's what I experienced with Anna in those hours after her faint but unmistakable signs of life began to return. We didn't speak, not with mouths, not with full sentences. Her eyes didn't open fully. Her voice didn't call out. Yet we communicated through every shift of her hand, every twitch of her lips, every breath that no longer felt borrowed. I heard her, and I knew without needing proof that she heard me too. It's hard to describe the intensity of that kind of bond unless you've lived it. I didn't need her to speak for me to know what she felt. I could feel it. It was there in the way her breathing would momentarily slow when I stepped away from the bed, as if her body knew I was leaving. It was there in the way her heart rate responded when I whispered her name, the way her fingers stirred just slightly when I sang the same lullaby I used to hum. During our quiet nights in bed, it wasn't some dramatic Hollywood revival. It was quieter, but in that quiet, it was sacred, pure, true. We had always shared something unique, Anna and I. Even before the sickness, before the hospitals and machines and endless medical conversations, we didn't have to fill the air with chatter to know each other. We could sit in a room together for hours, saying nothing, and still feel full connected, whole. That's the kind of relationship we had. I could tell how her day had gone by the way she sighed when she hung her coat. She could sense when something was troubling me just by how I poured my coffee. That depth didn't disappear just because her body had weakened. If anything, it deepened, intensified, became more spiritual than physical. She didn't need words to tell me she wasn't ready to leave. I knew. I felt her grip, however faint, on this world. On me. There was one moment that solidified everything. I had been talking to her for a long stretch, telling her about our daughter, how she was being so brave, how she missed her mother's stories before bed, how she still wore Anna's scarf when she slept. As I spoke, I could see Anna's lower lip quiver, just slightly. Then, as I leaned closer, her brow furrowed just enough to look like concern. That wasn't a reflex. That was emotion, recognition. And when I said our daughter's name again, her heart monitor responded with a subtle increase. My chest tightened. Tears filled my eyes. There was no question anymore. My wife was still with us. Maybe far away, yes, but not gone. I sat beside her, holding her hand, and we just existed together. That's all we did. We breathed in the same space. I spoke softly, but sometimes I didn't speak at all. I just rested my head near hers, and in that silence, there was a conversation louder than any words could offer. It's incredible how much you can say without saying anything. We talked in the way hearts talk. She told me she was still fighting. I told her I'd never stop believing. She asked for time. I gave her my whole life. It was all there in the stillness, in the warmth of our skin touching, in the pauses between the mechanical beeping that marked each second she stayed. The nurses told me they'd seen things like this before, rare moments where connection and presence made more difference than any drug or device. She knows you're here, one of them said, placing a warm hand on my back. That's why she's responding. Don't stop. And I didn't. I stayed. I let our bond speak louder than the silence of her condition. It was our love, our history, our shared life woven together in invisible strands that were now pulling her back, slowly, steadily, like a tether to reality. And here's what's truly wild. That bond had always been there. It just became clearer when words failed. That's when I realized how much of love, real love, is quiet. It's not about the grand gestures or poetic declarations. It's the hand on the shoulder during hard times. It's the shared glance across a crowded room that says, I know what you're thinking. It's the way that people can read each other's pain without saying a thing. That was us. That had always been us. And in that hospital room, as life tried to slip through our fingers, that bond held fast. The doctors would later try to explain her partial recovery. Neurological activity can sometimes resume in unpredictable ways, one said. Perhaps there was an atypical reaction to the sedatives another offered, but none of them could truly explain why she stirred when I held her hand, why she moved when I spoke, why she tilted her head slightly toward my presence like a flower bending toward light. They tried, of course, but I didn't need their theories. I had already lived the answer. I had felt it. I had witnessed it. That unspoken bond what we shared, it was more than memory, more than comfort. It was medicine, maybe not the kind they kept in vials or monitored on screens, but the kind that touches something deeper, the kind that says, I'm still here with you. I still choose you. I still believe. And she responded not because I told her to, but because she knew, because some part of her felt the same way, because the connection between us was louder than her coma, louder than the machines, louder than death itself. In the days that followed, Anna's responses would come and go. There were setbacks. There was progress. It was not a straight line, but that bond never weakened. It only grew stronger, and no matter what the outcome would be, I knew one thing for certain. We had touched something eternal in that room. Something. No illness, no diagnosis, no goodbye could sever. We didn't need to speak to say I love you. We never had. Hospitals, for all their rigid structure and scientific certainty, are sometimes forced to admit when they do not know. That moment came days after Anna began responding in small but undeniable ways. Her case, once filed mentally as another end of life patient by the attending team, had quietly become something else entirely, a question mark, a confounding anomaly in a sea of calculated outcomes. The attending physician stood at the end of her bed with a furrowed brow, scanning her chart like it would reveal some hidden variable he had missed. Beside him, the specialist whispered in careful tones, tossing around phrases like spontaneous, neurological stimulation, outlier reaction, and delayed septic reactivity. But none of their words had weight. None of them could explain what was happening to Anna, because by every measure, every blood test, every brain scan, every clinical forecast, she shouldn't have been waking up, and yet she was. The team had delivered their prognosis with brutal certainty just days before. She has hours, maybe less. Her brain activity was minimal, her vitals on a slow decline, her responses non-existent. They told me, gently, that I should say my goodbyes, and I had. I'd whispered parting words with a shattered heart, but now, here she was breathing, stronger, responding faintly to touch and sound, occasionally moving in ways that felt unmistakably intentional. It left the medical staff stunned. One of the neurologists, a gray-haired man with decades of experience, simply said, "This isn't supposed to happen. Not like this." There's something chilling and exhilarating about watching trained professionals wrestle with the unknown. These were people who had seen everything: rare diseases, last-minute miracles, heartbreaks beyond counting, and yet Anna's case made them pause. They ran more tests. They checked and rechecked scans. One resident even questioned whether there had been a mistake in the initial diagnosis, an error in reading the brain activity reports. But the attending snapped back, "No mistake. I've never been more certain. She was gone." And now, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't know how. Her chart became the most talked about item on the ward. Medical students hovered a little longer near her room, their curiosity piqued by what had quickly become known among staff as a quiet comeback. Not a miraculous resurrection, not some dramatic revival, but something more subtle and perhaps even more mysterious, because she wasn't just surviving, she was changing, improving in ways the doctors hadn't predicted and couldn't quantify. Her brain scans began to show increasing levels of activity, slowly at first, but unmistakably trending upward. Her vitals stabilized, her oxygen levels improved, reflexes began returning, the lines on the monitors, the ones that once drifted toward flatness, now held firm and rhythmic. Despite all the data, they couldn't find the why. They could describe what was happening, yes, they could point to improved numbers, but when pressed for reasons, they shrugged. One doctor candidly said, "We don't have a medical explanation for her turnaround. That phrase stuck with me. No medical explanation. In a place where every outcome is supposed to fit neatly into a cause and effect framework, Anna had slipped through the cracks defying the logic of medicine, the expectations of science, and the predictions of the very people trained to understand life and death. I think that unsettled them more than they let on. Doctors are not gods, and most don't pretend to be, but they are scientists, and science demands clarity, patterns, predictability, and Anna had broken the pattern. She had taken what should have been her last breath and somehow refused. She had turned back from the edge, slowly and quietly, as if pulled by some unseen force. And that force was the true mystery. Was it a rare misfire in the brain that reignited her systems, a sliver of undiscovered biology? Or was it something more elusive, something spiritual, perhaps even miraculous? As the days passed and her condition continued to shift in improbable directions, theories began to circulate. Some blamed anomalies in the medication schedule. Others wondered aloud if her immune system had responded in some extraordinary way we didn't yet understand. One nurse even suggested, in a hushed voice, that perhaps she heard him, me, and chose to stay. Of course, it was quickly dismissed as sentimentality, but I didn't dismiss it, because I had felt that too, that our bond, our connection, had somehow reached her when nothing else could. There was even talk, briefly, of publishing her case. One junior doctor mentioned submitting her turnaround to a medical journal, focused on rare recoveries. This could challenge existing literature, he said. Scanning his notes, she could become a case study in resilience, but even that plan faltered. Why? Because there was no measurable cause, nothing to explain, just results with no rationale. And in the world of medicine, that kind of mystery often goes unspoken, uncelebrated, even feared. It unsettles the foundation. If this could happen without explanation, what else might lie beyond their control? But not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be witnessed. And I witnessed every second of Anna's slow, silent rebellion against the impossible. The doctors could not define it, but I could feel it. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't luck. It was will, her strength, perhaps bolstered by love, perhaps by fate. Whatever it was, it didn't fit in a textbook, but it was real as her breath against my cheek, her fingers curling around mine, her eyelids fluttering when I whispered our daughter's name. There's power in the unknown, and sometimes the unknown is the greatest proof we have that life is not always linear, that healing does not always follow rules, that the human spirit is capable of things no instrument can measure. Anna's recovery, partial as it was, mysterious as it remains, became a quiet rebellion against certainty itself, and in doing so, she reminded everyone who bore witness that not all miracles arrive in blinding light. Some come in stillness, some come in a twitch of the hand, a slow return to breath. Some come in the form of a medical mystery the heart understands far better than the mind ever could. I used to think goodbye meant finality and ending, a closing of the door. It was the word people used when there was no going back, no second chance, no space for continuation. When I whispered goodbye to Anna in that hospital room, I believed I was releasing her, letting her go. I thought goodbye was an act of mercy, of acceptance, of surrender. But I was wrong, or at least I didn't understand then how layered, how fluid, how alive goodbye could be. Because that farewell, spoken in the quiet shadow of what I thought was death, turned out to be the beginning of a far deeper, far more complicated journey, not just for her, but for me too. There was a moment etched into my memory like a scar where I stood by her bedside, holding her hand that was barely warm, and I whispered, "It's okay. You can rest now." Those words were soaked in pain, but spoken with love. I believed that was what she needed: permission, release, a sense that I would be okay, that our daughter would be okay, that she could finally loosen her grip on a world that had grown too heavy. In that instant, the goodbye felt holy. It felt like I was opening the door to peace for her. And yet deep in my soul, I didn't feel like she had accepted it. Not fully. There was resistance beneath the stillness, a sense of unfinished rhythm in the silence, a heartbeat that hadn't said its last word died as the days unfolded. As she began to stir and respond in ways no one predicted, I kept returning to that goodbye. Had I meant it? Was I ready to lose her? Or had I said it out of duty, out of some misplaced belief that loving someone means knowing when to let go? The truth was, I had never wanted to say goodbye. Not then, not like that, but in the language of grief. We are taught to speak in it even when our hearts whisper for more time. And so, I said it, because I thought I had to, because I thought that was the script. But Anna wrote her own script. Her resistance to that goodbye, her quiet, persistent return to life, taught me that farewell does not always mean departure. Sometimes it's a pause, a threshold, a breath between chapters. Her journey back from the brink taught me that goodbye can be a lesson in humility and moment, where we confront our own limitations, our inability to see the whole picture. We think we know when the end has come, but we don't. Not really. There's so much we cannot control, cannot predict, cannot explain. And perhaps that's the greatest grace of all, that life doesn't always obey our timelines. And neither does love. Even now, long after that moment, I still carry the weight of that goodbye. It didn't vanish when she improved. It didn't erase itself when the monitors began to stabilize. It lingers because it was real, because it was vulnerable, because in that moment, I laid bare every piece of my heart. And that, I've come to learn, is what goodbye really means. Not the end of presence, but the purest form of presence. It is when we show up most completely, when we offer our full selves, stripped of pride or pretense. Saying goodbye to Anna, even temporarily, was the most honest thing I'd ever done. What's more, saying goodbye didn't weaken our bond. It strengthened it, because it forced me to face the truth of what she meant to me and what our life together had become. It pulled into sharp focus the everyday beauty we had taken for granted, the quiet mornings, the shared meals, the laughter that echoed in our daughter's room. In preparing for loss, I discovered the full depth of our life's meaning, and in doing so, I learned that goodbye, when spoken from love, is not a rejection, it is an embrace of everything that came before. Over time, as her condition fluctuated, the meaning of that goodbye began to evolve. It became less about release and more about reverence, a sacred moment suspended in time, a memory that, instead of breaking me, began to shape me. It reminded me that every moment with someone we love is a gift not to be stored or saved, but lived fully, even if it leads to goodbye, because love, by its very nature, makes space for loss. To love deeply is to risk deeply, and every goodbye is proof that the love was real, that something mattered. The nurses, some of whom had seen hundreds of goodbyes in their careers, told me that no two were ever the same. Some were violent with grief, others quiet with peace. Some were incomplete, some never spoken. Mine, they said, was rare. I didn't understand what they meant at first, but now, I think I do. It wasn't rare because it was dramatic or poetic. It was rare because it was answered, because Anna heard it and chose not to let it be the last word, because, through some mystery of love or will or fate, my goodbye became the very thing that brought her back. So, what is goodbye, really? It's not just a word we say when something ends. It's a way of honoring what was and acknowledging what cannot be held forever. It's the breath we take before we break, the prayer we speak when we don't know what else to say. And sometimes, if we're lucky, or perhaps if we listen, it becomes something else entirely. A bridge, not a wall. A threshold, not a conclusion. A whisper that says, I will love you still, even in the silence. Now, when I look at Anna, whether her eyes are open or closed, whether she speaks or simply breathes, I don't see a person I said goodbye to. I see the person who taught me what goodbye truly means, not as an ending, but as an awakening, a reminder that presence exists in many forms, that love doesn't vanish with distance or illness or time, that the heart has its own language, and that sometimes the most powerful words we say are the ones that echo long after they're spoken. Goodbye no longer means loss to me. It means truth. It means depth. It means love that was strong enough to risk breaking and did, and still remained. Because Anna didn't die after my goodbye. She lived, and so did I.